All you need to know about Apollonius of Tyana as the true Pythagorean continuer of the true philosophy is that he existed, and that the Romans tried to kill him, and he escaped this this situation somehow. But listen, he's still alive today. He is in heaven. He's alive. And he has actually visited many of his disciples, followers. All you need to do is read the ancient literature about him, and you're just going to be absolutely persuaded.
Fair play. So, okay, what David's saying is that if we can demonstrate that Jesus died and then he wasn't dead, then this would constitute a resurrection. All right, fair enough. But as you rightfully point out, this is what other religions state in terms of, the claims that relate to their religions. The juicy stuff is demonstrating. And of course, we're going to get to that now.
And I'm not even trying to pretend that everything is identical. Every one of these religions and their stories and their cults and practices are going to have differences. So keep that in mind. This is not like I'm pretending everything is absolutely identical, but you're dealing with the same kinds of things and claims from Caesars. And man, the list can go on and on for deities, demigods, heroes, mortals that become gods, cults that are originating them, with heroes like Pythagorean followers, such as Apollonius of Tyana. You're gonna have to special plead to make Jesus the one.
If Jesus was dead and he was alive again later, I'd say that our atheist friends have a great big Son of God-shaped hole in their worldview.
All right, so there's a quick pause, but this was actually the entire point of my first video, and it was the central claim that I gave him. We can grant his premises, the premises that he's going to give throughout this argument, at least most of them, and he's still left empty-handed. He doesn't actually achieve the claim that he puts across. So he speaks about, we can know that we have a purpose in life. We can know, a way for salvation. We can know that X, Y, and Z. And he draws this conclusion from simply Jesus resurrecting. And as Christopher Hitchens put it a long time ago, you're still left empty-handed. That doesn't do it. And the examples I gave in my video was with Govardhan Hill, with Krishna. Suppose it was the case that Krishna or some entity lifted up the hill, as is told in Hindu legend. It doesn't follow from that the doctrines and the central teachings of Hinduism is true. And of course, David knows that. He wouldn't do. He's not a Hindu, right? He wouldn't buy these things,
right?
But the same could be said, of course, of Muhammad splitting the moon. Like, suppose he did actually split the moon, this just wouldn't entail the truth of Islam, and most Christians know this. So I don't know why they would find that they can make this jump when it comes to Christianity.
There are so many things you point out and that can be said about this, but one I'd like to do in this is kind of a unique tack that I've recently encountered when I did my Does Yahweh Exist video based on Jaakko Garika's work. He wrote a dissertation, and the whole thesis is showing so many philosophical issues with Yahweh even existing. By the way, that's a huge red flag, because if the God of the Old Testament didn't exist, you might as well pick a version like Marcionism or something that at least says, hey, that God doesn't need to have existed. Jesus' God is different. He's a loving God, not this asshole who's flooding the entire planet, and it creates chaos and death and has all these problems and lies and sins, lying spirits and things, which are all in your Old Testament. But I want to emphasize something that I find in that very phrase of a Son of God shaped hole. Isn't it interesting when you actually start studying the history behind these ideas and when they show up in history, that Jesus has to be a son of a God? John Dominic Crossan debated a Muslim apologist. And in that debate, he said, your Muhammad was in the 7th century, 600s later, right? If he was in the 1st century not claiming to be a son of a God, in the social environmental context in which sons of gods were the thing. It's like today we have hippies in the 70s running their hippie style clothes and doing certain type of music. And then now today we have different styles and genres that are popping up. That's the old fashioned. Well, the idea of a son of a god was absolutely relevant to the context. And I would say also puts a timestamp of why does Jesus have to model the going Greek and Roman ideas of God having an actual son? And it wasn't just Roman and Greek, but remember, they're under Roman occupation at this time.
Yeah.
So I just find it ironic that it walks like a duck and talks like a duck in the time and period in which Rome, the dominant culture, the dominant Hellenistic vibes, are finding their way into the origins of this very cult.
Yeah, no, fair point. It would be more of it would be a bigger claim if it was different to what was cool back then.
Right.
And the fact that it was cool back then and that it was doing the same thing is actually a red flag for a lot of scholars. It's like, oh dear, this is very common stuff.
Was Jesus dead? And I mean really dead, not passed out, not in a coma, not in a brief state of cardiac arrest. Was he dead? Yes, he was.
Most scholars that I've encountered think Jesus was crucified and died. Yes. In fact, I don't know. It's not just scholars, but common sense tells me everyone at some point dies. That's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a big claim, is it, really? It's like, if you grant that Jesus was a real person, that's it. Like,
right.
Saying, oh, something amazing happened with this individual, they died. Yeah, no shit. Like, that's not a surprise at all. Yeah, good point.
Now, the new generation of atheists who learn about Christianity primarily from social media may be surprised to learn that there are historical facts about Jesus.
So I want to pause here to talk about narrative building, because this is central to apologetics. They try and build a narrative so that their audience will just dismiss someone. For instance, they say that they can't trust them. And this is actually part of what's going on here. Mm-hmm. David is painting a narrative, which we'll see bloom in just a moment, but he's painting this narrative of most atheists not thinking that Jesus existed. Now, you've already noted that actually, in your experience, most scholars do think a person called Jesus existed and that he was executed. And my experience with atheists is most of them are willing to accept that, or they just do accept that. Like, that's just a thing about history. It's a fact. It's the same as saying that Muhammad was a real person that really did cause an immense shakeup in the Arabian Peninsula. So, like, the problem that we see here is, and this is what I accused David of in my first video, it's straw manning. It's representing most atheists as something that they're just simply not.
I have to totally agree with what you just said, but I would also want to add the caveat of saying that a lot of online atheists do. I feel like he's arguing against a group of atheists that aren't us. He's dealing with a very obscure, probably chip on their shoulder, pissed off at the religion, haven't actually investigated things. So if that's who he's talking to, let's grant him that together here, Stephen, and say, okay, yeah, many atheists haven't investigated this material. We aren't those atheists. And in fact, I would go so far to say that we are looking at the scholarship probably closer. I am looking at it, I would say, and this is my little brag and my bolstering here, at scholarship closer and more scrutinizing than he is. And he would do the same to Islam. This is the thing. Like, he would look at these sources, extremely critical, granting certain things, showing, hey, that's historically embarrassing looking. I'm going to say that probably happened in the Muslim sources or in Muhammad's life, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I do the same thing with the New Testament, except he can't see the fault of his savior. So technically, apologetics is saving the savior from any failure and problem. And there's so much to go into. It's just shocking.
Yeah. No, you actually raise a fair point. I guess dismissing, the bulk of atheists, and especially, those that have studied it, those that are scholars, those that have really cared about the subject and have come to the conclusion that there probably was a Jesus and he probably did exist and get executed. Dismissing those based on a minority is just not smart. It's far from charitable. It's just an excuse, and a lazy excuse, not to deal with the more intriguing criticism that you might receive. I mean, I guess it would be like dismissing the entirety of Christianity because Catholicism is absolutely bonkers. You could do that, but that's a mistake to do. Right. I guess where I'm coming from, though, on the primary atheists or the new atheists, this new atheist movement, as apologists are keen to describe it, is, say, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett. Are any of them denying that Jesus existed and that he died? Because if
I
they're
don't-
meant to be the people that represent this new movement that David doesn't like, surely they at least should have the view that he's now ascribing to most atheists. That seems like a pretty unfair move.